A coupling sat on Art Beckman's workbench that didn't belong to any parts catalog on Earth. Machined steel, knurled at one end, threaded at the other, tolerances cut to 1,000th of an inch, the kind of precision that only showed up under a caliper and a raking shop light. Nobody driving past the pole barn on Highway 3 would have known what it was for. Nobody was supposed to, not yet. Behind him, stacked 3 rows deep against the corrugated wall, sat 41 dead pumps, Grundfos submersibles, motors seized, impellers chewed down to nubs of gray metal, every one of them pulled from a well somewhere in Sac County and marked "scrap" on somebody's invoice. The smell in that barn was machine oil gone stale, rust, and the faint mineral tang of well water dried into old gaskets. Art hadn't bought a single one of those pumps. He'd asked for them. Wayne Ginter had practically laughed, handing them over. "Take all you want," Wayne said, wiping grease off his hands with a red shop rag that had gone the color of dried blood years ago. "Freeze free. Ain't like they're worth anything." Art just nodded and loaded them into his truck bed one at a time, careful as a man handling something breakable, even though by every measure that mattered. They already were. Out at the edge of the Prairie State Irrigation lot, 3 trucks sat idling that Tuesday afternoon in late April, engines ticking as they cooled, exhaust curling thin against a sky the color of skim milk. Their owners leaned against tailgates the way men do when they've got nothing better to do than watch somebody else's project fail slow. 61 years old, reading glasses pushed up on a sunburned forehead, Art carried a spiral-bound ledger everywhere he went. 30 years of pump serial numbers, repair dates, failure notes, every entry in his own square, unhurried handwriting. He never threw a broken thing away until he understood, all the way down, why it had broken. Nobody in Sac County had ever watched a man try to marry 2 different manufacturers' equipment together before. Nobody knew why he'd need to, and Art, for his part, wasn't in any hurry to explain himself to men leaning on trucks. If stories about quiet stubbornness, old-fashioned know-how, and people who won't quit on a problem until they've actually solved it still mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. The Beckman place had been irrigated ground since 1958, the year Art's father Walter sank a well by hand with 2 neighbors and a borrowed rig. 7-year-old Art, standing at the lip of the hole handing down tools he was still too small to properly use. Walter never went past the 8th grade, but he could stand at a wellhead with his palm flat against the casing and tell you, just from the vibration, whether a bearing had another season left in it. He taught Art to listen to a pump the way other fathers taught their boys to listen to a tractor engine. The pitch of it, the rhythm, the small hitch in a sound just before something gave way. Walter kept no formal records. Everything lived in his hands and his ears. And when he died in 1998, sitting in his recliner on a Sunday afternoon with the radio still playing, Art understood something had gone into the ground with him. So Art started writing things down instead, filling ledger after ledger with numbers his father had only ever carried in his head. By the time Art turned 60, those ledgers filled most of a shelf in the mudroom. Every pump he'd ever serviced, every well depth, every failure, cross-referenced by date and by farm. But the records alone couldn't explain what had started killing pumps across the county faster than anyone could keep pace with repairing them. For that, Art made the 2-hour drive to Ames 3 separate times over 3 years, carrying mason jars of well water sealed with electrical tape, dropping them off at the Iowa State University Extension Lab like a man delivering evidence to a courthouse. The report that mattered came back in February, printed on plain letterhead, no drama to it at all. Fine sand content, 230 parts per million. Standard centrifugal submersible pumps were rated by every manufacturer Art had ever worked with for a maximum of 50 parts per million before wear became a serious concern. The Sac County aquifer, drawing up through a layer of old glacial outwash sand laid down before anybody's grandfather had broken this ground, was running more than 4 times over that limit. Art sat at his kitchen table with that single sheet of paper for the better part of an hour, coffee going cold beside it, reading the number over and over like it might resolve into something less inconvenient. It didn't. What it told him, once he let himself hear it, was that the pumps weren't broken. They were the wrong pumps for this particular ground, and had been for as long as anyone could remember. Only nobody had ever put a number to why. Word got around the way it does in a county that size, mostly through Marty Odegaard, who ran 300 acres of corn and soybeans 2 miles east and stopped by the shop that spring out of plain curiosity. Standing in the doorway with his cap pushed back. Cutting up a Grundos and a Gould's together? Never heard of such a thing. Might work. Might blow itself apart 40 feet down where you can't get at it. Marty wasn't being cruel about it. He'd farmed too long, watched too many clever ideas fail, expensive and public, to hand out encouragement he didn't feel. Art let the comment sit there without answering it directly, the way he let most things sit, and went back to measuring. The conversation that mattered more came in June, out behind the shop. Wayne Ginter standing with his arms crossed over a company polo tucked into pressed jeans, sun glinting off his sunglasses pushed up into his hair. Centrifugal. Art. Manufacturer knows their own equipment better than either of us does. Maybe on clean water. You're not a design engineer. You're a guy with a torque wrench and a theory. Art didn't argue that point, mostly because there wasn't much to argue. He picked up the torque wrench in question and went back to work, and the silence between them said more than either man was willing to. Wayne wasn't entirely wrong to worry, and Art knew it better than anyone standing in that lot. Prairie State's whole service model ran on standardized parts, factory-trained technicians, and warranties written around equipment that behaved the way the spec sheet promised it would. A hybridized pump, whatever its merits, voided every one of those guarantees the instant it went into the ground. If it failed at 40 feet, there was no factory rep coming to make it right. Art understood that risk in full, turned it over more than once late at night, and accepted it anyway. They didn't argue about it any further after that. Art just kept machining, and the shop light stayed on later most evenings than it used to. By July, the trouble Wayne's own service numbers had been quietly tracking caught up with the whole county at once. Pumps were failing at a rate of 1 in 8 per year, sand-scoured impellers, and burned-out windings turning up on Wine's service bench almost weekly. And every pull cost a farmer somewhere between $340 and $490, depending on well depth and how deep the tech had to reach. Then Prairie State's distributor, tightening its own liability, after a bad claims year on the books, cut the standard pump warranty from 24 months down to 18, and layered on a new requirement, a mandatory groundwater certification test before any warranty claim would even be reviewed. Another $180, cash up front, before a farmer could find out whether the pump that just died on him was even covered. Marty Odegaard got caught in that squeeze twice in one growing season. Pulled a burned-out pump in June, paid the $180 for the certification test, and got the claim denied outright. The same test that cost him the money proved his water exceeded the factory's sand tolerance, which the warranty specifically excluded. He stood in Wayne's gravel lot in July holding that denial letter like it had personally wronged him, heat shimmering up off the asphalt, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on his neck. Test proved I got sandy water. Denied me for having sandy water I paid to prove I had. Wayne had no good answer for that. His hands were tied to a spec sheet written somewhere far from Sac County for water that didn't behave like Sac County's water behaved. Standard centrifugal pumps run on closed impellers, thin metal discs stacked tight, spinning at high speed inside clearances measured in thousandths of an inch. Fine sand entering that narrow gap doesn't pass through clean. It grinds, continuous and patient, and at 230 parts per million that abrasion compounds fast, cutting a motor's working life down to a fraction of what the rating plate promised. Art's coupling did one thing, and did it exactly. It let a Grundos motor, still strong, still efficient, the part of the pump that rarely actually failed, drive a completely different kind of pump end, a Gould's turbine bowl assembly. The sort built from the start, for irrigation wells carrying real sediment load. Turbine bowls use semi-open impellers with wider flow channels and a line shaft bearing lubricated by the very water moving through it, rather than sealed factory grease. Sand doesn't get trapped in tight tolerances because there aren't tight tolerances left to trap it in. Properly matched, That geometry tolerates particulate loads up to 400 parts per million without the accelerated wear that had been killing the closed impeller pumps in weeks instead of years. The motor never cared what it was pushing water through. It only needed the right end bolted to it, and Art had spent 4 months of evenings cutting steel until one finally fit true. He lowered the first hybrid unit into his own well on a Thursday afternoon in August. The well casing warm from the sun, cicadas going steady in the shelter belt behind the house, 42 feet down, wired in, running under full load for 6 straight hours while Art sat on an overturned bucket beside the wellhead with his ledger open on his knee, listening the way his father had taught him to listen. No cavitation, no rise in amp draw, no grinding note working its way up through the casing, the sound Walter used to catch before anyone else could. It just ran, steady and unremarkable, which was exactly what Art had been hoping for. Wayne came out to see it that October, after the unit had logged over 400 hours without a single service call. He stood at the wellhead a long moment, hands pushed down in his jacket pockets against the first real chill of fall. Didn't think it'd hold. I know. I was wrong about it. That was the whole conversation. Wayne didn't make a show of saying it, didn't need to. Before he left, he asked, quiet, whether Art would walk him through the coupling specs sometime when he had an afternoon free. Art built 6 more hybrid units that winter, one at a time, working off the same ledger notes and the same lab numbers, never charging more than parts and shop time. Marty took one in March, still a little skeptical even installing it, and admitted by June it hadn't blown apart 40 feet down the way he'd half expected. 2 more farms got them by the following summer. Nobody organized a demonstration or bought space in the county paper. It moved the way most things worth knowing move out there. One pump pulled, one conversation over a fence line, one farmer deciding to see for himself before he'd believe it. Wayne eventually started stocking turbine bowl components at Prairie State, right alongside the standard centrifugal lines. He never called it Art's idea in front of a customer. He didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew whose idea it was. Art still writes in the same kind of ledger his father never bothered to keep. Entries in that same square handwriting, serial numbers and hours log, nothing dramatic about any of it. He likes to say a pump will tell you exactly what it needs, if a man's willing to listen instead of just replacing it and moving on. Wendell Berry once wrote that the soil is the great connector, the source and the destination of all our lives. Art never read that line. He'd have agreed with it anyway. He just would have said the same thing about groundwater instead, and said it a good deal shorter. Have you ever trusted a quiet instinct when everyone around you was certain you were wrong? Or is there a piece of hard-won know-how from your own family that stuck with you over the years? Tell us in the comments below. We read everyone. Let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this one matter to you, please subscribe.